Everybody has a story. You have one. Everybody's stories matter immensely more than we can imagine. It matters to you, but it also matters to God. Nobody gets the story that they want. And what I want to talk to you about today for a few minutes is a chapter that most of us will experience. Nobody wants to. What do I do when I cannot find God in my story? Not just when the story is hard, not just when it's not turning out the way that I want to, but when the central character that I depend on, God, seems to be unfindable. And I want to do this by talking about a man who became known as St. John of the Cross. He lived in the 1500s, and he is most associated with a particular phrase, dark night of the soul. Dark night of the soul has kind of entered into the lexicon in our day, and it's often used as a general term for a difficult time or somebody who's going through depression or they've lost or experienced a failure will often say they're experiencing the dark night of the soul. That's not the way that John of the Cross used it. He uses it in a much more specific and spiritually targeted way. He entered into Carmelite monastic community from Mount Carmel in the Bible. He was what was called a discalcid Carmelite, and that just meant shoeless, like shoeless Joe Jackson for baseball. He was a reformer. He was trying to make spiritual life simpler. He was very closely associated with a woman named Teresa of Avila that we might look at in this story series. She wrote a book called Interior Castles. Often, people who are reformers are not liked by the reformees, and that was the case with John of the Cross. And he actually was literally kidnapped by other monks, and they locked him in a closet. Robert Barron talks about this, and they would take him out and beat him because they were so upset with what they felt like he was trying to do to reform, change the church. This was during the time of the Protestant Reformation, and so there's what's sometimes called a counter-reformation going on to try to help reform the Catholic Church. While he was in the closet, John, of course, had no pen or paper to write with, but in his mind he began to compose the work that would become known around the dark night of the soul. He died without it being published or known. It was not till sometimes after his death, appropriately, that it came to enter into the language and the life of the church. This is part of what he writes. This is from the book by Richard Foster and James Smith, Devotional Classics. At a certain point in the spiritual journey, God will draw a person from the beginning stage to a more advanced stage. The person will begin to engage in religious exercises, grow deeper in spiritual life. Such souls will likely experience what's called the dark night of the soul. The dark night is when those persons lose all the pleasure that they once experienced in their devotional life. This happens because God wants to purify them and move them on to greater heights. So this is somebody, greater heights. This is somebody who, often it's the case when someone first becomes a Christian, they're intensely motivated to read the Bible. They love to pray. They long to worship God. They want to serve, and they feel like they have been growing an enormous amount. What they may not know is that often actually those feelings, those motivations are a gift from God to support somebody in the early stages of their spiritual life. But there's a danger that I'll start to think, oh my gosh, look at me, look at how devout I am, look at how spiritual I am. John of the Cross actually writes about how the 7 deadly sins can attach themselves deeply to our spiritual lives. And so he says, after a soul has been converted by God, that soul is nurtured and caressed by the Spirit. Like a loving mother, God cares for, comforts the infant soul by feeding it spiritual milk. Souls find great delight in this stage. They begin praying with great urgency and perseverance. They engage in all kinds of religious activities because of the joy they experience in them. But there will come a time when God will bid them grow deeper. He will remove the previous consolation from the soul in order to teach it virtue. And John goes on to describe it in this way. God perceives the imperfections within us, and because of his love for us, urges us to grow up. His love is not content to leave us in our weakness. For this reason, he takes us into the dark night. He weans us from all the pleasures by giving us dry times. John says God actually creates dry. That image of weaning, you might know, is taken from Psalm 131. Pastor and a friend, Tyler Staton, was talking about this in wonderful ways not long ago. This is where the psalmist says, "My heart is not haughty, and my eyes are not proud. I don't concern myself with things that are too wonderful for me, but I have grown content, I have calmed and quieted my soul. It is like a weaned child within me." That's such striking imagery. The weaning process is not at all pleasant, not for the one who is doing it, not for the weaner or for the weenie. What happens then is the mother is with the child, and the child is clamoring, "Gimme, gimme, gimme, gimme," and the mother does not. The child has to learn to be with the mother and trust the mother when the mother is precisely the one not giving the child what the child wants. And that's the image that the psalmist uses here. And that's the picture of what happens in the spiritual life. There'll come a time when, not because I'm immersed in sin, indulging gossip, greed, arrogance, and so on, not because I've done something wrong, but in order to help me grow, God withholds that sense of emotional delight in what I am doing to help keep me from getting too proud. It's a constant problem in the spiritual life. Henry Nouwen used to say, the hardest thing in the spiritual life is to stop being the prodigal son without turning into the elder brother. If you've ever read The Once and Future King by T.H. White, the Camelot story that then was the basis for the play and the movie Camelot, Lancelot is this character who is not only remarkably gifted physically, but incredibly pure spiritually. And he sings this hilarious song where he's talking about how the soul of a knight must be incredibly pure. And he says, but where in the world is there such a man? C'est moi, it's me. And here I am as pure as a prayer, incredibly clean, with virtue to spare. And you hear that song and you think, oh man, there's trouble coming, because nobody's that way. We're all broken. We're all part of the fellowship of the withered hand. This is just the truth of all of us. And so in the dark night of the soul, God, in a sense, seems to hide from us. And it's a bit like when I was a kid and I was learning how to ride a bike. My dad would run alongside me and hold me up. And then as I was actually getting better, one day he let go. And of course, what happens then is I fall, and I fell so much. My mom said she felt so much empathy, she closed the curtains of the house so she would no longer have to look at me falling off my bike. It feels like, Dad, why are you doing this? I felt much better when you were supporting me directly. But eventually, if I'm going to grow and develop, those kind of artificial supports have to be taken away. This is part of what's happening in the dark night of the soul. John of the Cross goes on, it's such fascinating language, to say, through the dark night, pride becomes humility, greed becomes simplicity. No soul will ever grow deep in the spiritual life unless God works passively in that soul by means of the dark night. And the word passive is very striking. Often we think of the spiritual life as active, and I study the Bible. That's a good thing. I pray. That's a good thing. I serve other people. That's a good thing. I confess to somebody. That's a good thing. These are all active things. But then when I'm doing active things, I'm kind of in control, and that can feed that sense of look at me and comparison and arrogance. And so in the dark night of the soul, doing more is not going to be helpful. And if you find that you're in a dark night and you're having a hard time finding God, probably doing more is not going to help you find him. It's kind of like being in the desert. And I remember reading in a very difficult time when I was in the desert, among other things, is an invitation for the people of Israel, or you or me, to realize I'm still God's beloved child when I'm not feeling at all productive or fruitful. All those things that I used to think of that I was doing for God, I'm no longer unable to do. And then I can learn, and He still loves me, and He still loves me, and He still loves me. In the dark night of the soul, I let go of not just my attachment to reputation and money and success and all those things, but also to my need for spiritual consolation, having real big insights into prayer, thinking of myself as somebody who's really good at understanding the Bible, or being able, no, I can't even do that anymore. I can't do that anymore. I am being weaned. And yet I find now God is here and God loves me. I think I mentioned on a previous video a few weeks ago, I saw the Northern Lights not too long ago. I always wanted to see them my whole life long. We think of the dark night often as a bad thing, and generally it does involve grief and pain. But when I went to see the Northern Lights, I had to go to where the night was very, very dark. Where there's other lights, sometimes called light pollution, it would get in the way. It was only when I went to where it was darkest that I could actually see the greatest beauty from way far away that would otherwise be obscured. In the dark night, we become able to see God and His love for me and His beauty and His care and His goodness, even when I just feel good for nothing. The dark night of the soul is about entering us into freedom from not just the attachments around this world and my success and my ego, but even my attachment around my spiritual reputation or my spiritual experiences, and cling to God alone. That's the beauty of the dark night. So now today, no assignments. This is not about being active. Just take a look. Is there any place in your life where there is pain or grief and you find it hard to find God? And now let that go. And ask God, God, would you give to me whatever freedom that you want as I become a little bit more like a weaned child, simply able to be with you even when I cannot see or hear you, and I wait patiently. We meet in the dark night. We meet in the dark night. That's our story.
Hey, if you enjoyed that video, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss any future teachings from John Ortberg here at Become New. My name's Tim, and I'm a part of the team here. This series is all about stories. Everybody has a story, and everybody's story matters. And we want to know about your story, whether it's a story of coming to faith or a story of spiritual growth. Whatever it is, we're here for you. You can email that to us at connect@becomenew.com, or you can text it to us. You can also sign up for daily reminders whenever we drop a new video via text by texting the word BECOME to the number 855-888-0444. You can also send us prayer requests there. There's a team of us that meet to pray each weekday for viewers just like yourself. If you'd like to receive the emails that go along with each video, be sure to check that out at becomenew.com/subscribe. More than a video to watch, this is really a community to belong to, and we're so glad that you're a part of it. We'll catch you next time.